Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT Top 10 video. Today's video will be a countdown of the top champions for ranked play in patch 10.17. These are champions you're likely to see in most games, whether as a frontline, carry, or support. While it is possible the meta may shift over time, it's worth pointing out that the meta hasn't really changed a lot since 10.17, so expect to see a lot of familiar faces. With that said, let's dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. All right, let's get back to the video, and starting off, we have the champion coming in at number 10 on today's list, Ziggs. Ziggs is definitely one of the best opening 1-cost champions you can find to carry you through Stage 2 and well into Stage 3. Later on in the game, he does fall off, but he's still plenty useful by providing Demolitionist for Gangplank or the Super Mech. Even though his late game impact is mainly as a trait provider, he can still be useful with items like Blue Buff or Luden's Echo to try to help your Jinx get resets. Generally though, whatever items you give him will be sold and given to either Aurelion Sol or Gangplank. Let's get back to his early game though, as that's definitely where Ziggs does best. Pair him with Malphite and another Rebel, along with either a second Brawler or Rumble. That combination of traits and champions should be enough, assuming you've 2-starred Ziggs, to win streak you through the early rounds. Honestly, if you high roll an early Rebel start, you're set to coast to the beginning of Stage 4, and Ziggs is essential for that. Let's move along to the number 9 champion for this week, Lucian. It's a toss-up to choose between several different candidates for this spot on the list. Lucian does well as a 2-cost carry for Cybernetics, but he does need both that trait and Blaster to truly shine. Ahri, on the other hand, is a great early game carry because she can get by without the use of her traits. And then there's a bunch of various 3-cost champions you could easily find quick enough in the game and skip running a 2-cost carry entirely. Lucian comes out ahead of the pack due to the consistency of early 3 Cybernetics. Once you're able to 2-star him, you can coast through the rest of Stage 2, 3, and the beginning of Stage 4. There's a few other trait and champion combinations early game that can match this, but Cybernetics are one of the most consistent. Lucian also smoothly transitions into several compositions, whereas other early game openings are too narrow or too broad in the direction you can go from them. Up next, we have Rumble as the number 8 champion. Since we mentioned Ziggs earlier, we have to talk about ol' Rumble, right? Well, yeah. Basically, Rumble does a lot in the current meta. He's a beast early game and does well in the mid and late game. Rumble is also part of both mech compositions as well as Rebels, although in Rebels he's mostly just a stand-in until you find Gangplank. Even without Demolitionist, he can still do a lot of damage on his own, making him a great frontline champion. One of the strongest openings you can have is an early Rumble. As we said, he's a really good early game champion because of his damage and the fact that you can pair him with Ziggs early on in the game for Demolitionist. Lastly, we want to point out that on Dwarf Planet, he's borderline overpowered. Due to the smaller board, his ultimate can practically hit every unit if they're on the same side of the board as him. We recommend trying him out on that galaxy if you get the chance. Mech Pilot is a strong comp, so it's no surprise that we're seeing several of its champions on today's list, as Fizz is up next as the number 7 champion. Much like Rumble, we see Fizz in a lot of places within the meta. Of course, he's important for mech, but outside of that, he's just an all-around strong infiltrator for a variety of comps. Fizz does good AoE damage to the backline while also providing crowd control to them, which means he almost always has value. Both Shaco and Echo were considered for this spot in the top 10 because all 3 of these infiltrators are viable assets in the current meta. Shaco is a strong carry for either mech or Dark Stars, and Echo dominates the late game. Fizz ended up on the list slightly ahead of the other 2 because he's just a solid champion. Not to mention, he's important for mech. Basically, if you're running an infiltrator like Zed, Echo, or Shaco, make Fizz your second infiltrator and you'll get a lot of value. Vanguards are still one of the top defensive traits in the game, so the number 6 champion for today is Wukong. While we could talk about almost every Vanguard, we do need to narrow it down, and it's between Jace and Wukong for a spot on today's list. The reason Wukong squeaks out the advantage is due to how commonly played he is. This has a lot to do with his secondary trait, Chrono, but also just the fact that he provides good crowd control. Don't get us wrong though, Jace is still an amazing frontline champion and will always recommend him, but the amount of work that Wukong can do is hard to pass up. We're also at a point in the meta where you see Chrono splashed in a lot, and oftentimes Wukong is one of those champions. Basically, he's hard to kill, has an amazing ability that stuns, and has a good secondary trait. Next, we have Soraka coming in at number 5. Mystic is such a strong splash trait that it was always a guaranteed spot on the list for them. Soraka has become one of the strongest, if not the strongest, overall Mystic in the game. She definitely struggled throughout set 3, but now she's in her prime as the healing of her ability can absolutely turn fights around. That said, Lulu is another Mystic that could have been on the list. The difference between the two, besides having drastically different ultimates, is that Soraka is both easier to find initially and 2-star. Not to mention, she's essential for one of the top compositions, Star Guardian Sorcerer. Lulu is all around great, but being a 5 cost isn't the most reliable every game. We definitely recommend using Soraka as one of your Mystics in the current meta. Alright, let's move on to the next champion, Teemo, as the number 4 champ for today's list. Astro Sniper has been a top composition for quite some time, basically since the mid-season update. The strength of it is varied, but the most consistent aspect of it has been the crowd control of the build. Between Nautilus, Gnar, Wukong, and Teemo, you get so much CC. And Teemo leads that pack of units because he not only has amazing crowd control, he has damage that's comparable in impact to Jhin. Sure, Jhin is better against single targets and has large swings in damage, but Teemo with blue buff and Morellonomicon is a mushroom shooting machine gun. The frequency of which he's able to cast, as well as the damage he does against clumped up champions, makes him more valuable than Jhin within Astro Sniper. The only problem is that you almost never see Teemo outside of that build, which is a shame considering how strong he is in it. We're into our top 3, and to start it off, we have Janna coming in at number 3. Janna really takes the cake as a late-game powerhouse champion. While her trait Paragon isn't much to write home about, it's made up for by the fact that her ultimate is ridiculously good. Throw Shojin or 2 on her and Janna will hard carry late-game fights by constantly stunning the enemy team. At the moment, she's more or less been relegated to Star Guardian Sorcerer, but she's still valuable outside of it if you're able to provide a good item for her as well as 2-star her. That said, she is a key component to the late-game Star Guardian Sorcerer build and a big reason as to why that comp is so strong. Our number 2 champion for today is Neeko. There's quite a few Star Guardians on our list today, and Neeko sits atop of them all. The reason for that is due to her strength as a frontliner. While Poppy is a vanguard, she's still a 1-cost champion, and the only way to make her live long enough throughout the game is to 3-star her and give her full items. But even then, she's nowhere near as effective as 3-starring Neeko, so between the two, Neeko is definitely the stronger frontliner. Give Neeko defensive items and place her in a position to get the most out of her ultimate, and she should stall long enough against most compositions for your backline to carry. She will struggle against higher damage builds like Jhin from Astro Sniper, but against most other carries, she's going to live long enough to cast multiple ultimates. Lastly, she's viable as a protector for other builds as well, even if she's not given the same amount of priority as she is in Star Guardian Sorcerer. And coming in at number 1 on today's list, we have Gangplank. Gangplank is back again as the number 1 champion of our top 10, despite the fact that he received nerfs in 1017. But those nerfs were so small that they really left him unaffected. He's still a crazy strong late game champion between the amount of damage he can output and the crowd control he provides. The main downside to Gangplank is that you do want to 2-star him, and his traits, besides Demolitionist, aren't really that great. Okay, yes, we do acknowledge that there are times that Space Pirates can do well, but consistently, they will always struggle as finding Gangplank early enough for the trait to be relevant is very difficult. And Mercenary? Well, Double Strike is amazing for sure, but the other 2 upgrades are basically just gold sinks. If you have the extra 8 gold just lying around to spend on them, they can be fine, but you can really go every game playing Gangplank 2 without his mercenary upgrades and still just be great. All in all, Gangplank remains one of the strongest late game 5-cost champions and has a huge impact on the meta between Rebel and Mech builds. And that's going to be the end of our top 10 champions for ranked. But as usual, before we end today's video, we have a couple of honorable mentions to go over. To start off our honorable mentions, we have Syndra. Syndra almost made it into the top 10 list, mainly because Star Guardian Sorcerer is doing so well in the meta. She didn't make it for a few reasons. One is that while she is the primary carry, she's not the only damage source for the build. Victor or Xerath can be used for additional damage, not to mention both Ahri and Neeko can do a lot as well. Another reason is that she really does need blue buff to carry. Without blue buff, it will take a bit of time for her to ramp up in a fight, which will slow down how much damage she outputs and make it difficult to win fights consistently. Lastly is that she's really only played in Star Guardian Sorcerer. Consider that all 3 of Janna, Soraka, and Neeko can find use in other builds, but Syndra is really only played in the one. All that said, Syndra is still the carry for Star Guardian Sorcerer. She's designed perfectly for that build, as it provides a means for her to ramp up with mana generation while having a decent stalling potential between Nico and Janna. Our second honorable mention is Bard. Bard has definitely fallen out of the meta quite a bit, but he still remains useful nonetheless. An early Bard may not be as effective as he once was, but it's still worth buying for the additional experience he creates. There's not much else to talk about in regards to Bard, as his purpose remains the same as always. We still recommend playing early Bard if you can find him, and sell him after Krugs if you're lucky enough to get him 2-starred. Alright folks, that's all we have for you today. The meta has remained steady throughout 10.17, which is no surprise considering the small amount of balance changes they did. We expect the next patch to be similar, as set 3 is coming to an end soon. Let us know in the comment section below how you feel about the list and what champions you'd think deserve to be on it. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.